Thomas Morris Chester, educator, lawyer, journalist. A teacher in Africa, newspaper correspondent who traveled with the Union forces during the Civil War, and lawyer and politician in post-war Louisiana, Morris Chester lived a full and engaged life in which he pursued his potential to the fullest extent possible. Thomas Morris Chester was born on May 11, 1834 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to George Chester, a free man, and Jane Chester, an escaped slave from Maryland. Chester's parents must have been relatively prosperous because they were able to send him to Avery College, a trade school near Pittsburgh, when he was 17. He remained at Avery College for 2 years, and in 1853, possibly with his parents, he journeyed to Monrovia, Liberia. In Monrovia, he continued his education at Alexandria High School. Chester remained in Liberia for only a year and returned to the United States in 1854. He finished his high school education at Thetford Academy in Thetford, Vermont, for which he graduated second in his class in 1856. After his graduation, Chester decided to return to Liberia to teach. One of his first jobs was as a teacher of Africans who had been liberated, probably by the British Navy, from slave ships. Liberia was the colonial stepchild of the American Colonization Society, a group of mostly white Americans who advocated sending free African Americans back to Africa. At the time of Morris's second arrival in Liberia, the colony had recently declared its independence in 1847. The president was an African American from Virginia named Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Only about 3,000 resettled African Americans remained. Many had returned to the United States. By 1860, Morris had begun his career as a journalist when he founded a newspaper called the Star of Liberia. He also served as the Liberian correspondent for the New York Herald and seems to have been active in Liberian politics. The start of the Civil War drew Chester back to the United States in 1861. In 1862 through 63, he worked with Frederick Douglass to lobby for all black Federal Army units to fight the Confederates. When federal authorities approved this, he helped recruit African Americans to join the Massachusetts 54th and 55th Infantry Regiments, two all-volunteer units. Chester had wanted to volunteer to help lead one of these regiments, but when he discovered that the Federal Army regulations barred any African Americans from holding a rank higher than sergeant, he decided not to enlist. After learning shorthand so that he could quickly write down some of the inspiring speeches he heard given by other African Americans during his recruitment work, Chester landed a job in 1864 through 65 as a war correspondent for the Philadelphia Press. Writing under the pen name Roland, he chronicled the combat and day-to-day existence experienced by the units of the Army of James, a subgroup of General Ulysses S. Grant's Army of the Potomac that had been assigned the job of pushing up the banks of the James River toward the Confederate capital of Richmond. It is said that he wrote a dispatch about the Federal Army's capture of Richmond while seated at the desk of the deposed Confederate President Jefferson Davis. After the war, Chester began work as a fundraiser for a Pennsylvania group that sent money and teachers to help freed slaves in the South. From 1866 to 1871, he traveled across Europe soliciting funds from wealthy individuals and European governments. Chester spent the winter of 1866 through 67 in Russia as a guest of the Tsar, then settled in London, where he studied law and was admitted into practice as a lawyer in 1870. Chester returned to the United States in 1871, this time to New Orleans, which was under the protection of federal troops and controlled by the political forces loyal to the National Republican Party. Even though he was Northern born and bred, Chester immediately took a liking to the South, believing that in spite of the virulent racism of many whites there, it was a place where African Americans and whites could learn to live together in peace and with respect. Chester set up a law practice in Louisiana and became active in politics. In 1873, the governor appointed Chester a brigadier general in the state militia, and in 1875 through 76, he was appointed a superintendent of education for a number of parishes in and around New Orleans. After the end of the Reconstruction governments in 1877, Chester supported himself through his law practice and various federal appointments. One of his later positions was as an investigator on behalf of the U.S. Attorney General, looking into voting fraud in East Texas, a dangerous job for any African American at the time. Chester filed a report that chronicled the problems that blacks were having in voting, but little was done to change this situation. Chester lived in Louisiana until ill health forced him back to Pennsylvania in 1892. He died of a heart attack at his mother's house in Harrisburg on September 30th, 1892, at the age of 58.